and welcome to the very first of the 24 lectures on Baptist history. I am Ergun Canner, professor here at Liberty University of Theology and Church History. We will have 24 separate lectures that deal with Baptist history from the very beginning of time to the present day, at least as far as we can go. What we're going to be doing in these 24 lectures is taking about 50 minutes per lecture to cover a certain section. Your syllabus, which is posted on the internet, will be your guide. Our midterm will be after Lecture 12. Our final will be after Lecture 24. The time constraints for turning in the papers that follow this class are listed there in your syllabus. There is no pre-work, but there is work during the video presentation. At certain points in the lecture, as you look down at your student notes, you will see a blank. I would ask that you fill in as you hear me cover that topic or cover that issue. In the first few lectures, I'll be enumerating, and the purpose of that is so that you can see where we're going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. For instance, in this first lecture, which is called Where Do Baptists Fit In?, there are 5 sections, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and each part has its own numbers underneath it. That might help you in following along. I'll make references to the textbooks that we use. 2 of the books that myself and my brother have written. One book that is, I consider, the seminal work on the Reformers and their stepchildren. And the 4th one is the lecture notes. All of my tests come directly from the lecture notes. All the questions in multiple choice form, true and false, come directly from the lecture notes. And thus the textbooks remain a supplement, but an important supplement because they are part of your reading. All right, guys, let's begin. We're going to be starting on part 1 of Where Do Baptists Fit In church history? Why do we even study church history? Part number 1 is called Why Study Church History? There are 6 points to why we should study church history. Number 1, because of our heritage. It is appreciating our past. A few years ago, I asked a student, well, tell me about your church's history. And his answer was, well, the only thing I know is that the gym was built in 1996. It's now our modern period. That's the most frustrating thing we deal with. Most people hate history because they think the only thing that's important is the present. The problems that we deal with today, they dealt with generations ago. They found solutions for them. If we don't find solutions for them, we don't appreciate our own history. We make the same mistakes they made because we are as equally as dumb as previous generations. Learning from our history is an appreciation of our past, appreciation of the shoulders on which we stand. Our heritage goes back. Christian history did not just pop out of nowhere after Pentecost. Pentecost is something on which we build. The patristic period is something on which we build. The medieval period is something on which we build. Every single one of these things that we're going to talk about in this first lecture. Right now, as we're dealing with this, we are in a generation, actually the past 2 generations, that have what I call a sense of spiritual myopia. And you can write that down under the section on heritage. Spiritual myopia is a nearsightedness. Does that make sense? Myopic, meaning I'm nearsighted. Without these glasses, I can't tell anything about you except whether you're black or white. I don't know what you look like. I can't see anything, but it's just the way my eyes work. Nearsightedness means all you can see is that which is directly in front of you in a certain distance. We are now in an era of church history and church work where we have churches that are wildly successful but transient. They can build a crowd, but they can't build a congregation. And that's because they've learned the fundamental fault of not knowing history. They have learned how to do something, they just don't know why they're doing it. They can build a crowd. You can build a crowd tomorrow. All you need to do is put a sign in front of your church that says, Miracle Healings this Friday. Man, thousands of people show up. Every one of them cripped. Everybody showing up on a crutch. Everybody wanting something to take care of their immediate needs. And so churches have learned how to deal with immediate needs. But if you don't have a fundamental anchor, a foundational anchor to the Word of God and to the history that God has given us, problem is they're going to flip and go. They're going to flip the moment they're tired. They're going to leave the second somebody else answers their questions. We have a touchy-feely, scratch and sniff Christianity. It's a mile wide, but only about an inch deep. Maintaining church growth, and I love church growth, but maintaining church growth, the necessity of that is understanding history, understanding the creed, understanding the Bible, understanding doctrine. If all we do is preach 15 ways to get over a stomach ache, 31 ways to get over a heartbreak, 10 ways to find a new job, there's really nothing different from us from anybody who's a popular motivational speaker. We're not motivating people. We're saving their bloody souls from hell. Their sin-sickened, darkened souls are in danger of eternal, everlasting damnation. Lead them to Christ, now what? Well, they're going to grow deeper if they love Jesus more. We now stand in a period of time where heritage means nothing. The vast majority of students that I deal with, and I pick and choose. I love doing what I do. Absolutely adore it. And the reason is because I taught on a seminary level for a number of years. And you guys know that the one animal that knows more than any other animal on the planet is a first-year seminary student. Man, they come in with their mind made up. And I often compare it this way. When I first went to college, and I was in college getting my BA, I got asked this question all the time. What side you on? Well, they meant conservative or liberal. So I always learned my answer. I was like, well, I'm conservative, Bible-believing inerrantist. All right. Get to seminary, they say, what side you on? What do you think the question is? Somebody raise their hand and tell me. What do you think the major question in seminary is? Perpetually. Yeah, man.
Calvinist.
You got that right. How many points Calvinist am I? How many petals on your tulip? So I learned to answer that. Are you a Calvinist or are you an Arminian? For those that are watching at home, you're about to get mad at me. I'm going to look right in that camera. Am I a Calvinist or am I an Arminian? I'm neither. I'm a Baptist. And the only thing the Baptists have had in common with Calvinists is the Calvinists hunted us during the Reformation period. Now, you get out of seminary and you go to the church. I started pastoring in Kentucky, and I got the same question. What side you on? So I was ready. I'm a conservative. I'm a Baptist. No, they weren't asking either one of those questions. They want to know, was I Ford or Chevy? They want to know, am I UK or University of Louisville? You see how it translates? The students that I had for so many years came in almost filled with their knowledge and assuming that their knowledge was going to walk them through. I like the 17-year-old kids. I like the youngins who walk in who are, just moldable and malleable. Here's the problem, however. In the generations that you're dealing with and I'm dealing with, they basically survive this way. They get all of their worship, and they think that's all they need. All their doctrine comes from worship. Because Christianity at the present moment is very popular, isn't it? Christianity right now is it's almost cultural and convenient and comfortable. Well, because of this, there's a tendency to say, I love Jesus. Give me Jesus, just don't give me doctrine. I want to talk about Jesus, but let's not use theological terms. Can't we all, light a candle, sing the Coca-Cola theme song, link arms, wave back and forth? What a waste of time. Here's the fundamental truth about worship. The more you know Him, the more you can sing about Him. Isn't that right? The deeper you know Him, the more meaningful your worship. I say it this way, there is no doxology until there's good theology. I'll give you a great comparison for this, and then we're going to move on to our next point. My wife and I were married in 1994, and I loved her completely then. Didn't know her, loved her. I mean, I knew her as far as she let me see, but when we're dating, everybody's on their best behavior. You burp quietly, like this. You let me get that door for you. Can I pull your chair out for you? You're sort of showing off. And then you get married, and she sees who you really are. And she sees you when your hair's messed up. Don't laugh at that. When your hair's messed up. Or when you don't look as good as you think you do. And when you aren't acting as nice as you do. When you're mad about something. Well, having been married a decade, you know what? I love her more now. But didn't I love her totally when we got married? Sure I did. Don't you love her totally now? Of course I do. What's the difference? The difference is I know her more. The more intimate our relationship is, the more profound my love is. It's the same thing with the Lord. The more you know Him, the more deeply you understand Him, how He works, know His heart, read His book, the more profound your worship's going to be. And so this separation of worship and doctrine is, let me use the Greek term, stupid. It's a waste of, if somebody comes up to me and says, I love Jesus, I don't really like talking doctrine, they don't love Jesus. They love as much as they know about Jesus. They may be saved, absolutely, but they are a weak, milk-fed Christian. And the thing is, when they come to churches, here's what you have. They're going to walk in a church because it's exciting. They're going to walk into a church because the worship is exalting. And listen, let me offend another group of you watching. I am a hand-raising, singing, shouting, hanky-waving Baptist. My pastor said, if you ain't spitting and sweating and slobbering, you ain't preaching. And we sang for an hour, and then he preached for an hour if he was short. And all y'all who complain about getting out at noon, son, our little missionary Baptist church didn't get out till 2, maybe. And everybody who complains about taking an offering. 1, we had a deacon's offering, a widow's offering, a building fund offering, and one time, Pastor, if there wasn't enough money, he'd pass it the second time around. And our pastor was a passionate preacher. We had worship that was passionate. I love that. I'm not demeaning, I'm not diminishing the importance of worship. I'm saying you ain't going deep enough. The deeper you are, the more you love lost souls. The deeper you are, the more you love the Lord. The more you love the Lord, the more profound, the more meaningful, the more visceral your worship is going to be. And that's an understanding of our heritage. The more you know that we've made it through, the more blood we've soaked in, the more profound your love for the Lord who saved us is. Number 2, truth. We study church history because of truth. God's timeless truths are revealed in church history. Here's an astonishing fact. The way that God worked in the Bible, He still works today. The God who saved Moses, the God who accounted Abraham's faith as righteousness and credited it to his account, is the same God who saves you. Same God who worked through Martin Luther in church history can work through you. The question is not whether He can, but whether you're willing to let Him. Number 3, heresy. Heresy ain't nothing but old lies in new dresses. Anytime a new heresy pops up and everybody goes insane about it, they say, oh, well, this is interesting. Of course it's interesting, but it's not new. I was in Washington, D.C. a number of days ago, and the Falun Gong people were there protesting their persecution in China. Well, Falun Gong is not new, but you say it started in 1992. That's right, but the lie's been with us for a long time. Scientology, Dianetics, whatever, been around a long time. It's just an old lie in a new dress. Well, how do I spot it? Well, the first question you need to ask is, do you really care to spot it? In the last 2 decades, Baptists have lost more members to the cults than any other denomination except for the Charismatics. And why is that? It's because we are really good at getting them in the door, getting them saved, Vacation Bible School, Backyard Bible Club, missions events, outreach events. Our pastors preach on salvation every week, and you better. We bring them down the aisle, put them in the baptistry, enroll them in a class, and they go right out the back door. When do the cults do their visitation? Who knows the answer? When do the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons do their visitation? Anybody know? When's their number 1 time? Yeah. At what time? You got that right. You know why? Sunday morning, 11 o'clock, who are you going to find? You're going to find the guy who walked forward at age 9 after VBS, filled out the card, somebody offended him, hurt his feelings, and he ain't never gone back. Why are we losing him? Because I believe we have committed spiritual child abuse. We take a babe in Christ, don't get him off the milk, let him wean for so long, they never get a taste for real meat, for real food. And they start inhaling heresy and they can't tell the difference. When my son was just a baby and my wife was so into every type of formula. Oh, we need this formula. I don't like that formula. This one's better for him. And it was all digestive stuff. But she said, I think he likes this taste. He's a baby. He doesn't know the difference in taste. You can feed a baby oatmeal. If you put it through the blender long enough, he'll eat it. A baby's hungry, right? We're so worried about how we present the truth if we don't present the undiluted, undiminished truth, regardless of the format. They're going to be weaned forever and ever. Nursery-fed, milk-fed Christians. And of course they can't tell the difference between the taste. Number 4, ecclesiology. This is the doctrine of the church. Ecclesiology is the doctrine of the church. And it comes back to the illustration that I gave. We know how to do things, but we don't know why to do things. We know how to get a crowd, but do we know how to keep it? Number 5, Personal reason for studying church history. It is a source of encouragement. Why is it that the devotionals we read these days are either touchy-feely or site-specific? Look at the Bibles in any bookstore. You got the men's study Bible. You got the woman's study Bible. You got the couple's study Bible. I'm waiting for somebody to come out with the just freshly broken up couple study Bible. The adopted children study Bible. I mean, it's so site-specific that it's almost like we're saying, well, you can't speak to me unless you've been through what I've been through. Well, guess what? In church history, they've been through it. Anything you faced, they faced. And man, when you see that there are others who have bled, died, suffered, tortured for their faith, it truly humbles you. And the biggest things that I complain about on Monday morning really ain't that big in reference to or in light of the things that others have gone through. Number 5, personal. Number 6, sixth reason is eschatological. Eschatology, prophecy, gives you an appreciation that there will be triumph. Regardless of how much suffering, regardless of how much pain, regardless of how much turmoil you go through, He will redeem the time. Part number 2, why then do we specifically study Baptist history and Baptist theology? There are 5 points I will make here. Why study Baptist history and Baptist theology? Number 1, balanced history. Going back to the issue of everybody wanting to sing and dance and do a backflip, but nobody wants to study the Word. History is balanced. You'll hear about it in a minute. Number 2, the free church. We are, in Baptist history, part of the most neglected period and the most neglected doctrine and the most neglected movement in history. We are free church people. I'll explain what that means in a minute, but it is so fundamental. 24 lectures, you're going to hear it just about every single lecture. 3, a martyr's mirror. A martyr's mirror. You shine the light. You see the reflection of those who have suffered for the things we take for granted. I tell people when I speak in churches that freedoms assumed become freedoms forgotten. And freedoms forgotten will become freedoms lost. 4, a believer's church. Let me handle this right from the first lecture, just in case anybody has not been offended so far. Let me finish it off. Looking right into the camera. Are Baptists, free church, believers' church people part of the Reformation? No. You mean we're not tied to German Swiss? No. French Swiss? No. We are part of the church restoration, not reformation. We fixed it. We didn't reform it. There's a fundamental difference. We are a believer's church. That is, we are accountable, we are local church, and the movement was hunted from the beginning because we refused to do infant baptism, because that's a magisterial thing, isn't it? We refused to allow somebody externally to tell us what to do. We are a local church movement. We are a free church movement. And we are a believer's church. You are not a member. Most of you know, and if you don't know by videotape, I was raised a Muslim. And one of the major questions that we get about Islam until I was 20 years old, one of the major questions we get, well, I hear Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. Is that true? Yes and no. It's true in that if you count biological growth. Because in Islam, if you are born into an Islamic family, your father whispers Shahada in your ear, and from that moment on, you're a Muslim. You're counted on the rolls. You could be a woman who signs the nikah, who marries the man who is a Muslim. You may never walk into a mosque, but you're a Muslim. We are a believer's church movement. We don't count you till we hold you under, until you bubble. We don't count you until you've made a public profession of faith. And that's a believer's church movement. You are not a member, you can't vote until you've made a public profession of faith. And 5, theological certainty. There are certain non-negotiables. Non-negotiables. Now look, I can fellowship with everybody. I can fellowship with just about anybody. And I'm not a Baptist bride guy. Baptist bride are those who think if you ain't a member of a Baptist church, you ain't going to heaven. That's silly. There will be a curtain in glory. And when they'll be giving tours, somebody will walk up to the curtain in heaven, and St. Peter will be asked, well, what's that curtain for? Shh, Baptists are on the other side. They think they're the only ones here. It's not your denomination. It's what you do with Jesus Christ, right? However, let me quick to say, I would rather fellowship with a fired-up charismatic than a liberal Baptist any day of the week. I got more in common with them. Presbyterians and I don't always get along, but I'd rather have a conservative, Bible-believing, Bible-thumping Presbyterian than a Baptist who doesn't believe in the virgin birth. That said, there are certain non-negotiables that are not up for a vote. You get that from church history. There are certain concepts for which our people died. You guys have any questions? All right. Somewhere down here you need to enumerate 2 words. The first term is free church. I'm going to read this to you, but it's in your notes. The free church. Any church movement in history that emphasizes absolutely no influence of outside forces on the church. It emphasizes the church local over the church universal. That's us. We are part of the church universal. Everybody knows that. We're all going to walk through glory with people that we have read about and studied, and people, that's right. We're part of the church universal. But the church universal doesn't have its first meeting until after God calls everybody out of the water and Armageddon takes place. That church hadn't organized yet. And even then, the saints who are saved during the tribulation will be found later. What I'm saying is, even after you're raptured, you're still not going to be part of the church universal because there will be those saved during the tribulation that are going to join the church universal. But the church local, that's the free church. Nobody, if your church wants to paint its walls purple, if you're truly a free church, nobody can tell you not to, as long as the church body votes and the majority say. Number 2, however, what is the believer's church? Any church movement in history that emphasizes local accountability of believers in fellowship and in membership. So, I happen to be a Southern Baptist. I'm a member of a Southern Baptist church named Thomas Road Baptist Church. My pastor is Dr. Jerry Falwell. Does that mean all Southern Baptist churches believe the same thing? No. Does that mean we have to absolutely agree on everything so we can cooperate? No. And does that mean that First Baptist Church of Nostril can tell Thomas Road what to do? It's the membership at Thomas Road. I am accountable to my pastor and my people. I am submitted under the authority of my pastor. Whoever the pastor of Thomas Road is, I am submitted under his authority. Whoever the leadership is, I'm submitted. Same thing as teaching. I am under the authority, under the umbrella of the dean of the School of Religion. I am under the umbrella of whoever is in charge. And that's the way it works in the local church. All right, part 3 of this lecture, we're making good time, is a church history overview. This outline will enable you to see the ebb and flow of history in a series of waves. Okay? In broad terms, it sort of serves as the outline of church history. There are, in part 3, I'm going to give you 7 points. Each one's got something underneath it, but I want you to know them. Number 1 is called patristic, the patristic church. Paternal, paternity suit, patristic. Roughly the years from 30 to 325. This is the persecuted church. Up until about 325, the church in the patristic period, and I'm making a distinction here, there's 2 sections of patristic, but roughly the patristic persecuted church had no buildings, was always on the run, and was hunted. During this period of time, there was the apostolic age, obviously, to the death of the apostles. Then there was the age of shadows. We're hiding in catacombs, we're starting out embryonic, young, infant churches, Ephesus, Smyrna, Macedonia, Troas, Crete, those churches. But now there's 2 terms I want you to know. Point C is the age of the church fathers. You don't have to know dates. There's only a few seminal dates that anybody ever needs to know in my classes. I'll tell them to you, but you don't have to write it down. 90 to 170 is roughly the age of the church fathers. That's marked by persecution and the defense of this question: who are these Christians? The age of the church fathers is also called, say, an apologist faith, because they were having to make a defense. Apologist, not the same thing. An apologist is somebody who defends what they believe. An apologist in your church is the person who defends Christianity. Billy Graham, these men from church history are apologists. If you ever note the sermons in history from Billy Graham, Billy Sunday, their sermons always dragged back to who is Christ. That's what the apologists did. We as Christians believe. And the early church fathers did that. The last one, which is actually point D under the patristic period, is the age of the apologists, and you can put a quotation mark around that because they're a different type. These apologists answered the question, what do we stand against? Why won't they join us? What do your beliefs matter? It's one thing to say, I believe in Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. But what if somebody comes alongside you and says, hey, me too? And you're like, no, you don't. Because they've joined Christianity with something else or syncretized it or watered it down or something like this. These guys are also known as polemicists, polemics. Now we're going to differentiate in this room, in this televised studio that looks like a classroom. I want to differentiate between you, whether you're an apologist or a polemicist, whether you're a classic church fathers type or whether you are a polemicist. How many here would say, I really don't like arguing. I don't like fighting. I love to drag everything I do back to the cross and keep explaining who Christ is and what Christianity is. If you're of that personality type, do me a favor, raise your hand. Got a couple? Sure. It's not that you don't like defending the faith. It's just that for you, the fundamental question is, who's Jesus Christ? How many here like to go to a coffee house, sit around the philosophers, the pierced and the tattooed among us? And if somebody attacks Christianity, you're on it. You can argue, you can stay up all night at Denny's arguing Calvinism until 3 a.m. and you've eaten through 3 things. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. You have a polemicist leaning too. The church has always needed both. That's what I keep telling people. Inevitably in my approaches, in debates and things that I do, somebody will go, oh, why do you do that? I like arguing. I'm really good at arguing. My people, I'm Turkish, my people are very good at arguing. You go to the bazaar, you go to the flea market, the term, man, we'll negotiate, we'll barter. How much for this? $10. I'll $10 for you. Come on, pay me. And we argue about over everything. I married a girl from the South. Southern girls don't argue. They hold a grudge. Like 30 years. They remember everything. My wife doesn't like to argue. I do. The church has always needed both. Church history needs those who defend the faith and also those who attack the cult. Because both of them hold eternity in their balance, don't they? If you let a Mormon believe that he's saved, but he believes that Jesus Christ is the twice-sired half-brother of Satan, I don't know how to translate that. They're going to go to hell thinking they're going to heaven. Same thing in your church. One man said that the number one mission field in America is the pew. Because we got an awful lot of people who have invested their eternity in their membership, not their name in the book of life. Okay? Second period was the patristic church as well, but it's called the protected church. Protected church. This is still the patristics, still the church fathers, patristic period, protected. But it roughly goes 325 to 600. People that I will reference in further lectures on this, Constantine. He developed an idea of the state church. See, when the church stopped being hunted, it was because of the Emperor Constantine. Constantine turned the church from being the hunted to being the protected. Two things, the Edict of Milan and the Edict of Toleration turned Christianity into the official state church. That's a good thing. They're not shooting at us anymore. Bad thing, a lot of problems when the state gets involved in the church. Next thing under the patristic protected period is we developed a lot of creeds. It enabled the bishops, the pastors of the local churches to get together and say, whoa, what do we believe? We've been running a while. What do we agree is the orthodoxy of the faith? C, under this period, would be one of the main characters of this period, Augustine. Augustine is the guy who writes the first attempt at first systematic theology. And becomes the standard of theology for 500 years. And Augustine influences radically the state. Remember, he is raised up in the state church period. He's raised up when the patristic church is now protected. It's okay to be a Christian. And since the state let us be Christians, Augustine's influence on the state church marriage is important. And finally, the papacy under this period. This would be point D. defending Rome. Rome surpasses the other centers of Christianity, which we'll talk about in a minute, and attempts to become the only official voice. It's during this period of time, from 325 to 600, that Rome decides we're the only voice of God. We're the only Vox Deus. All right, under part 3, the third point, medieval church. And the medieval church is divided up. It's the Roman church period. You can call it the Roman church period, roughly 600 to 1300. In the Roman church, medieval church, point A, I would write down Dark Ages. And I'm going to explain this to you, but you see it in your notes. Basically what takes place is this. Countries, after Rome falls, the fall of Acre, 476 AD, after Rome falls, what happens is this big, huge conglomerate that Rome has encompassed starts breaking up into parts and pieces. Those of you who are Europeans, those of you who are watching who are Europeans, your countries began to develop between 600 and 1,000. Scandinavia, the Teutons, which are the Germans, the British, these Celts and the uniting of these various... What it is it's regional. And this regional movement also had subgroups in there, feudalism. Our state within the state, our group within the group. It's somewhat akin to saying, yes, I'm an American, but I'm from North Carolina. And if you're from North Carolina, do you differentiate yourself from somebody from New York City? Yeah, I guess you do. You see things maybe a little differently. Perhaps not, but feudalism developed this way. We're loyal to the governor. See how it works. But there's something else that takes place when Rome falls. Education system falls apart because each individual region now becomes important as far as education. Guys, what happens is over the course of 400 years, illiteracy explodes. People go back to being practical, survivalist. I got a farm, got to take care of my family so I can survive. Education is the last thing on their list. You know why this is so important? Because Rome uses illiteracy to teach its heresy. If they can't read the Bible, they can't question your interpretation of it. Does that sound harsh? Good. I hope it does. I think the proof of a mature church is when you say, I'm going to be preaching from, and you hear the flipping of pages. I like the people to test me. I want the people to follow along. I want the people to question. I want them looking through their Bibles. I don't want them going, it's on the screen. I could be putting anything on the screen. I could put a recipe on the screen. But they didn't bring their Bible. Why? Because their Bible is underneath their coffee back at home. That's biblical illiteracy. Fundamental illiteracy in the medieval ages brought about this horror of the Dark Ages. What ends up replacing it? If you don't have biblical literacy, what replaces biblical literacy? Superstition. Somebody heard somebody else say, rumor and speculation. And aren't the Dark Ages just totally marked with superstition? The black cat, the giving somebody the evil eye, all these things started in the Middle Ages when truth was replaced with supposition. The epiphany of power. This is point B under the Middle Ages. Epiphany of power. Well, I already told you that under Constantine, the church allowed the state, and the state allowed the church, rather. Well, now we got a problem. That marriage continues, that courtship continues, and on Christmas Day, 800 AD, Charlemagne, Charles the Great, grandson of Charles Martel, Charlemagne is crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. And as if that wasn't enough, then Charlemagne rises from his knees and hands his scepter to Charlemagne. And we've got us an unequally yoked marriage. The church and the state are officially united. It's no longer the state in charge of the church. Now they're supposedly equals. But please remember this. Always remember this. Whenever the church and the state get married for anything, the church will always be treated as the harlot. Always. Always. Did you say always? Yes, I said always. Did you mean always? Yes, I meant always. How many politicians start talking Christ right around election time? Right? How many congressmen start coming to church 3 months before the election? Oh, I love Jesus. Dude. Where were you after the election? Oh, I was busy. Why? Because they need us. And what happens after they need us? Once their need is fulfilled, they throw us aside, just like a harlot. That marriage almost kills the church. The epiphany of violence, the church decides it's now going to be better than the state. You just write down one word, the Crusades. This is a period of time where the church decides it's better than the state. It takes control, it takes power, to its great peril. The Crusades were the shift from Christians in the army to a Christian army. We went from the just war to the holy war. It was also a shift in our doctrine. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, you can't argue with me. The Crusades were just as bad as the bombings of the World Trade Center towers. Because in the Crusades, the Pope promised plenary indulgence. He said, if you kill in the name of Christ, you get to go to heaven. That is precisely what Osama bin Muhammad bin Laden said. That's precisely what those that were part of that horror said. It was also a shift in the way we approached missions. Because now we were saying, kill the infidel, not convert them. Obviously, when the church is successful in the First Crusade, when we change our doctrine this way, nobody can argue because everybody's illiterate. They become more and more powerful. More and more power brings more and more arrogance. And the arrogance of the papacy is unbelievable. Concerned more, I've listed a couple of things, you don't need to write these down, but concerned more with power than piety, developing doctrines to meet the needs, fit the needs they have, morally, spiritually corrupt. And guess what? The average guy who's working a 90-hour week doesn't trust them. They are rich and fat, and bloated. They're rich off our money. The tithe is now 80%. And I'm working like a dog in the hot sun, and he doesn't even visit me. Why? Because he's fat and bloated, sitting back at his little church, sipping his margaritas, waiting for Sunday so he can do the Mass just as fast as he can. How terrifying is that? Clear lines are drawn between the priest and the laity during this period of time. Up until this period of time, you honestly have everybody a minister of the gospel of Christ. Let me deal with another controversy since we're Baptists. And Baptists are real good at controversy, ain't we? Food, fellowship, funerals, and fights. We're awesome. Preacher, do you believe in women's ordination? Now, I got your attention. Nope. But that's because I don't believe in men's ordination either. Spurgeon said, ordination was empty hands on empty heads. Ordination, though it's supposedly based on setting aside of the deacons, laying hands on the deacons, ordination has been taken to become this separation between laity and leader. Oh, well, he has to be able to do the baptizing. He's the ordained one. He has to preach. He's the ordained one. Everybody's a minister. Everybody. We're all ministers. That's part of the free church movement, but we'll come back to that. The morning star of hope in the Reformation, in the medieval period, were the guys who lead us to the Reformation. Jan Hus, John Wycliffe, and I'll talk in more depth about them later. 39-year period of time where even the papacy ain't getting along with itself, and there's a great schism, a separation. It's fun. It's fun to study. All right, next one, the Reformation Church. As I will hammer in the coming lectures, the Reformation is not one movement. The Reformation is 6 movements, 6 waves, 6 different and distinct movements that could not get along with one another. The Reformation is not one movement. There's 6 of them, including a Catholic counter-Reformation, where they were bleeding dry and they were unable to stop the bleeding, so they said, you know what, we're going to counter-reform. We're going to reform too. And they turned out to go backward even further. Age of Rationalism, after the Reformation period. Reformation period roughly goes 1300 to 1648. Age of Rationalism, 1648 to 1789. You know what? This is a period of time where cynicism grows toward the church. They start developing what we call the autonomy of the soul. Everybody thinks for himself. Philosophy becomes more important than theology in this period of time. Age of Rationalism is where what I think is more important than what I use as my authority. It's very anthropocentric, It's very man-centered. And quite frankly, the church in response doesn't handle it well. Point 6 is the age of modernity, 1789 to 1989. What is the age of modernity? Well, roughly from the fall of the Bastille, storming of the Bastille, to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the reason we use 1789 to 1989 is because the storming of the Bastille marked an amazing moment in church history, because it was the amazing moment where everybody said, no longer are we going to be a collective. We're going to rise up as individuals. And it really did mark this movement of autonomy. And it's also marked by a period of time of self-determination. I'm going to tell you whether it's true or not. And it's based on sensory data. If I can prove it, smell it, taste it, touch it, hear it, I'll believe it. But you see, we're not in that era anymore. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, we are in the era of the final one, which is post-modernity. If modernity is marked by, I'm not, cultural atheism. I won't believe anything until I see it. Post-modernity is horrible. It's hard. It's harder for churches to deal with it, because if modernity says everybody's wrong, post-modernity says everybody's right. You turn on the television and what do you hear? Excuse me, that's your truth? Truth is person-centered. Reader response. Marked by complete rejection of any kind of truth. All right, let me deal with part 4 very quickly. This is the pendulum effect in church history. It's pretty clear to me that I will not be able to get to part 6 or part 5 until the beginning of the next lecture. Part 4, the pendulum effect of church history. I'm going to make for you 6 points, and I'll make them very quickly. 6 points. This is called the pendulum effect of history. Number 1, please hear me. Oh, how this is testable. Church history is not cyclical. It's not cyclical. It's not cyclical. It's not cyclical. Anybody who says what goes around comes around is lying to you. Because that's based on a reincarnation view, isn't it? It's a Buddhist concept of time, that time recycles itself. Guys, in case you didn't know this, history is linear. It has a beginning, a middle, and it does have an end. How do we mark history? By time. How do we mark time? Rising of the sun, setting of the sun. But the Bible tells us that Christ will be the light in eternity. In other words, there will no longer be gravitational pull and rotation on the earth's axis. You won't be in heaven and go, man, I can't believe we've been here 40 years. There's no years. Time ends. B, there are 2 types of biblical history. 2 types of history, 2 types of time. Number 1, chronos. Chronos, chronology, marked time. Marked time. If I were to ask you how old you are, some of you look younger than you are, some of you look much older than you actually are. 40 years old. That's marked time. But the second type that the Bible talks about, it's not chronos, it's kairos. K-A-I-R-O-S. Kairotic time. It's not marked time, it's moment in time. Moment in time. It's not measurable, it's experiential. And there is biblical instance for this. For example, moment of salvation. It's marked by, everything is measured by this. You know what I'm talking about? A kairotic moment is a moment that radically affects you. If you were to remember it, it may have just taken place in 2 seconds, but the way you remember it, it's slow motion. Everything seems to freeze. The birth of your child, your wedding, your salvation. I think we make a mistake in preaching when we say, if you don't know the day and date and the hour that you were saved, you're probably not saved. What are you doing there? You're mistaking chronos and kairos, aren't you? I can't remember the exact date, perhaps, but I can tell you exactly what took place, because it was kairotic. Can you tell me how that's marked? Sure. You ever got in an elevator and smelled a cologne or perfume that reminded you of a girlfriend? That's sensory knowledge, isn't it? That's kairotic. All of a sudden your mind goes back to running through a wheat field in slow motion and writing notes that say, for your eyes only, and do you like me? Check box, yes, no, maybe, or whatever. All that's kairotic. It's kairotic time. C, church history is not cyclical either. It's measured by a pendulum effect. Pendulum swings back and forth, and watch this. It flows in dynamic flux. D shows you one of them, and E will show you the other one. Either church history is D, emphasis on intellect, or it's E, emphasis on feeling, emotion, and passion. In the periods of church history where it was emphasis on intellect, it was a call back to truth and knowledge. And problem with this is, the Reformation is this, right? Problem with this is if you go overboard with this, I'll talk about it in a second, but you go overboard with this, too much emotion, too much intellect to the exclusion of emotion, now you're getting away from worship, aren't you? But if you get too much on the emotional side and passion, emphasis, there are periods of time in church history where we really got into passion to the end of intellect. Don't tell me what you believe, tell me what you feel. Hallmark card Christianity. And church history is marked swinging back and forth, one of the two. Point F, each movement has its drawback. If orthodoxy alone is emphasized, those moments, because everybody in this room, you're one way or the other. You lean more toward intellect or you lean more toward emotion. Problem is, just like a period in church history, if church history is marked by a period of time where everybody is really into intellect and to the exclusion of emotion, almost to the saying, stop clapping, stop saying amen. You know, you ever been in a church where you sing for 5 minutes, but the preaching is 2 hours? Where they use transparencies and PowerPoint and lasers and all these things, and they're, okay, now they're doing Greek and Hebrew with people who are, truck drivers going. Nothing wrong with that. But if you do that too much, you become dry scholasticism. I give you a quote from Vance Havner. Vance Havner said, you can be as straight as a gun barrel theologically and as empty as one spiritually. Whew. But what's the drawback on the other side? You know it. You've been in a church where you sing for an hour and a half, hoping that they'll say sit down at some point. Drives you nuts. And then they finally sit down and you only got about 2 minutes for a sermon. Sermonettes for Christianettes, where it's basically 3 points. Hi, glad you're here. Fill out a card. See you next week. And you wonder, well, where's the sermon? Where's the meat? Emphasis on emotion to the exclusion of knowledge. You got to have a balance between the two. And there are times in church history, Azusa Street, for example, pietism, German pietism, Philip Jacob Spencer. There are times in church history where we overemphasized emotion, experience, feeling, touchy-feely, to the exclusion of knowledge, and there are times, whether we like it or not, where we overemphasized belief and ignored the visceral personal experience that you have in an encounter with Christ. Each age is measured by an emphasis leaning toward one or the other. What's the problem if you have too much tingly? What it takes to get them in church, it's going to take to keep them in church. And when somebody comes up with a better tingly feeling, they're going to leave your church and go to that other tingly feeling. And you're going to be left with a lot of instruments and nobody to play them. And drama outfits for nobody to wear. Because you found a great way. I love all those things. But you cannot emphasize the worship part without getting into the Word. And you cannot emphasize the Word without giving people a chance to respond in worship. That's church history. It flows back and forth as a pendulum. And you're going to see response, 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 response. And in the midst of it has always been this common thread, the dissenters. That's us. We were never part of an organized movement. We were never part of an organized voice. Rome didn't like us. But by the way, very few people did. It's the end of this lecture.